Welcome to Candid Conversations with Candidates, sponsored by Crowing Power in partnership with the Brainerd Lakes Chamber and Lakes Media Collaborative. I'm Kathy Nagorski with the Brainerd Lakes Chamber, and joining me today is Joe Radinovich, the DFL candidate for Minnesota State House District 10B. Welcome, we're glad you could join us, and we'll start with your opening comments.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm glad to be here. My name is Joe Radinovich, and I'm a fourth generation Crosby Ironton Ranger. I'm running for the Minnesota House in District 10B. I own a home in Crosby, and as I mentioned, I grew up there. So it's important to me to see someone in St. Paul who is going to represent rural interest in small towns like Crosby, Aiken, McGregor, and across both Crow Wing and Aiken County. I'm in this race because as someone who grew up in Crosby, I understand the problems that we faced. For the last 10 to 12 years, the Crosby School District's been in a position where we've cut teachers and programs. Other school districts across the area are in a similar position. When those programs are cut, it affects my nieces, my nephews, and the children, of course, that I'll raise in this district. For much of the recession, unemployment in the Brainerd Lakes area has been at 20% in the construction sector, or near 20% in the construction sector. When unemployment numbers are that high, it affects the people in my family, electricians, plumbers, pipe fitters like my brother, my cousin, my dad, and so forth. And finally, as we all know, property taxes have been rising steadily over the last decade. And with an aging population in this district, I feel that those property taxes place an undue burden on those on a fixed income looking to just stay in the home that they've lived in for years. So I'm happy to be here today, and I look forward to answering the questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Now let's move on to our questions. What are three things that distinguish you from your opponent?
Well, I think three things that distinguish me from my opponent. That's kind of a loaded question, but one thing is it may be apparent, but I'm a little bit on the young side. I'm 26 years old, and I view that as something that's positive for my campaign. For the last many years, we've elected people like my opponent, come through county government, who have had experience at the local level, and in the last 10 years alone, we've shut down the government twice. They say that as a 26-year-old, my generation will be the first to not do as well as their parents, and so I'm very concerned about that. I'd like to see someone down there who's interested in more problems, or finding more solutions than problems, rather. Additionally, I believe my opponent will go down and join a majority currently in the legislature that shifted $2.4 billion from statewide schools, including schools here in the district. I think that disinvestment in education is an unwise proposition for the future, and I look to strike a compromise on the next budget that would place a value on education. And in addition to that, I believe that my opponent will also go down and join a majority that took a short-sighted view of Minnesota's crumbling infrastructure. I think that during the last cycle, we could have had a much larger bonding bill. I think that bonding in this case makes a lot of sense because the interest rates are low, and we can invest in projects that are needed and put people back to work so that they're spending their money on Main Street and here in the community.
Okay. What strategy do you propose to help grow Minnesota's economy?
Well, I think that there's a multifaceted approach that we could take, and one thing to grow Minnesota's economy that we need to do, we must do, is to continue to invest in a workforce that makes Minnesota amongst the most competitive in the nation. For a long time, Minnesota's had more Fortune 500 companies per capita than any other state in the nation. And I believe, and experts agree that one of the reasons that's the case is that Minnesota has a highly educated workforce. But like I said, over the last few gubernatorial administrations, we've gotten in a position where we've been cutting across the board. And in my own home school district, we've cut programs that benefit, we've cut shop classes, we've cut programs for gifted and enriched students, and I think that takes a short-sighted approach. In the short term, I think that we can invest in, again, a bigger bonding bill while the interest rates are low, to put people back to work, to get money in their pocket so that they're spending their money on Main Street businesses and taking vacations, things you do with the family that bolster the economy around here, especially as a tourism economy. So.
Okay, so budget discussions in Minnesota have not come easily of late. What are your recommendations to balance the state budget?
Well, I think that any attempt to balance the state budget, which is a necessity, must come with a balanced approach. So that means that we need to be looking at all options to increase revenues and to cut costs sensibly. And I think that there's been an emphasis on cutting costs over the last 10 years, and we'll continue to do that where it's possible. But at some point, you have to say that some of these programs are worth keeping, and that we can only cut so far. So I look to broaden revenues in a variety of different ways, including like I said, seeking revenues, supporting the governor's last budget proposal, and like I said, sensible cuts. So I think that, but I do think I want to point out that it's a misnomer to say that the budget has been balanced in the last session. We haven't fixed the structural problems with the budget. They are anticipating a deficit coming up for the next biennium, and contrary to what the other party may have said, using one-time money to dig yourself out of a hole doesn't fix the problem unless you fix it for the future too. So.
Okay, let's move on to transportation. What is your solution to Minnesota's transportation needs?
Well, I think that, again, this is something that we need to look at, bonding bills to invest in, roads and bridges. I think that, high-speed rail is something that we could use in the future. I think it's the North Star line that runs up to Rice right now. That'd be great to see, come up to Brainerd so that people could commute between here and the metropolitan area. If need be, I know that my own job takes me to Minneapolis on a regular basis. I'd love to make use of passenger train. Additionally, there's a line that's been talked about running to Duluth. I think that's important. The metropolitan area, of course, has unique transportation needs as they've got so many people, making trips every day to work. So I'd look to, support metropolitan legislators in terms of, comprehensive project. But I do want to say that one thing that's important, and one thing I think that's been lacking in our politics lately is that people take a very short-sighted approach to the problems we have in this state. And as someone who is looking to live the rest of my life in this state, as someone whose children and grandchildren hopefully will grow up in the great state of Minnesota, I think that we need to be looking at the next 20 years and not the next 2 years when it comes to problems like transportation and education and everything else. Okay,
well, you mentioned education, and quickly, what's the state's role in workforce development?
I believe that the state has a big role in workforce development. There are two things that are mandated to be addressed by the legislature, by the Minnesota state government in our Constitution, and that's transportation and education. And it's no shortage that Minnesota's done education very well in the past. Indicators show that we're slipping in terms of test scores, and of course Minnesota has a very pronounced education gap too. And as I've said for a long time, I don't believe that the education gap is solely a race-based education gap. I believe that it's an economic level indication or gap, so that students from lower class backgrounds are not doing as well as other students. We need to fix that for the long term.
Okay. Well, thank you, and thank you for joining us for Candid Conversations with Candidates. Please learn more at votebrainerdlakes.com, and remember, vote November 6th.